BDP first came involved with the sort of concept of the Nightingale Hospital. I was talking to one of our clients, Matt Shaw at Great Ormond Street Hospital, who's the chief executive there. He was looking at North London's response, the ICU response to the lack of beds, and he was looking at the figures that were coming back from Italy and Spain in terms of how short of beds we were, and starting to look at how they might provide those in a sort of sports hall, converting a sports hall or a warehouse. I suggested that probably an exhibition centre was something that was more appropriate. Following day, pulled together a team from of architects and engineers from BDP. We arrived on site at 9 o'clock on the Monday morning, which was the first Monday of lockdown, and it sort of went from there.
When we first started, we understood that there was a need for emergency beds across the UK with the increasing pandemic. When we arrived in Nightingale, we were all standing outside with no real inclination of what sort of size facility. We entered into the facility to be told that this was the first of many facilities that might go across the UK, and was it possible for us to fit 8,000 beds into a facility like ExCeL. We quickly established that that was not possible, but the numbers were fluctuating, the brief was fluctuating very much day to day, as the data that was coming out of China at the time was unpredictable, unreliable. And it came down to the need that what could we fit in ExCeL, what would be the maximum capacity we could do, and how quickly could we deliver the first 500 beds.
Walking into the ExCeL Centre on the Monday morning, everyone was slightly overwhelmed by the size of it. And the sort of first day we walked into one of the halls, which it was only a third of the hall, but the space is sort of 90 metres wide. Overall, each of the halls are nearly 500 metres long, so they're enormous. And it's a big black space with sort of bright twinkly lights at the top of it, and other than that it's just huge, and it's sort of 12 metres high, so it's an enormous space, and trying to work out how this could be turned into a hospital was quite hard to sort of fathom. The first challenge we were given as a sort of design team was on the first morning we were told by, I think it was something like quarter to midday, we needed to start to say how many beds we could fit into the entire space. So the architectural team sort of got together, it was agreed how we do it, what the sort of ward arrangement might be, and they just went to it using their sort of Revit model that they'd already got, and looked at how many beds we could provide on a basic layout.
We had a saying when we walked in, everybody walked in the door, left their egos at the door, and everybody came down as one team. And it was very evident for the first couple of days that most people didn't even know each other's names, but everybody got stuck in and got involved in the process. And what came out of it was that the military led this in a very militaristic way, that the decision making was made very rapidly. If something needed to be made, everybody pitched in to find the right person to make that decision. We eventually came to a policy which we had the gold, silver and bronze committees. These three committees signed off at different levels, depending on the amount of finance that needs to go into the rapid nature of the decision, the clinical decision, of how we took decisions forward. But a lot of it was made as what we would probably call village hall committees. We all got together 3-4 times during the day, put the major decisions on the table, and everybody put forward their ideas and solutions, and we selected before we left that room. So all the decision making was instant, on time, to allow the facility to move forward. If we went into a typical design process of iterations of design, decision making, we never would have made it. So we actually had a conversation at the end of Nightingale where we looked at what was the positives that came out of it, and one of it was the decision making process, about empowering the people you've brought in to design and deliver to actually deliver that facility.
The Army and the project management team instigated 2 sort of meetings at 5 o'clock in the evening and 8 o'clock in the morning. So they were reporting meetings really that were highlighting sort of blockers that might prevent us delivering what we needed to. But our design also had to be flexible enough to cope with a bit of change. So we need to be confident that what we're proposing wouldn't sort of lock us down into one particular route, and would give some sort of flexibility and variability.
Developing the bed base was a task that was taken on by a multiple team. So the architectural team, the clinical team, the engineering team. First of all, we did a very initial workshop about what could be achieved, particularly with the materials and the supply of what we had on site.
We needed to sort of try and create the bed bay. The bed bays needed to be transparent and allow you to sort of view across them, because that was the model that was there, so that you would have one ITU nurse that might be overseeing 5 or 6 patients. So we needed a sort of a back to fit stuff to it, and a sort of a structure to sort of make it secure and contain all the medical equipment around the bed. We also made sure we had a decent space between the bed bays that would allow us to distribute electrics, medical gases, anything else that we needed to go up and down there. We ended up having to put data in there as well. And they were all fed by the underfloor boxes and the underfloor infrastructure that was in the ExCeL centre. But it needed to be something that was flexible and repeatable. So I think on the second day, we were introduced to the guys who make the exhibition stands, and they sort of showed us their system, and we looked at it, sketched stuff up, and we thought we could make it work. And then the following day, all their stuff was up in Coventry. The following day, they brought it down overnight, and by the time we got there, they'd already made sort of 3 sample bays up, and we got that sort of, we had the beds taped up, and the guys got that really signed off by the clinical team.
We had an infection control advisor on board. Initially, that was a military infection control advisor, which was then replaced by a NHS infection control advisor. The policy was that we would try to separate the flows of clean and dirty. So the central boulevard of the ExCeL acted as our clean zone. It acted as a zone where staff entered into the building, sterile supplies and goods were held, and they entered into the dirty spaces or the COVID active spaces through doff and don procedures. So that's spaces where you take off your PPE or put on your PPE before entering the space. So we worked very closely with how a military hospital would work to initially set up the design, and then we took that through the NHS protocols to ensure that there was an across of COVID environments from the cold and the dirty side. Medical gas installation was probably one of the biggest pieces of work that we're undertaking. We had on site things such as water, drainage, power, but there was obviously no oxygen supply, vacuum supply in the building. So we had to think very quickly of how we could supply medical services to the bedhead. The easiest solution, and probably one thing we were lucky, is we had an underground car park. So we could actually supply oxygen supply underneath the building, drill up through the building and bring them into the bed spaces. We were also very lucky that the floor of the exhibition centre had a service void underneath. We could bring those oxygen supplies up and into the building. We did end up with, and we believe still, the largest VIE supply, oxygen supply in the world at the site, which a lot of the hospitals were very jealous about at the time, that we happened to have the largest supply in the world. But it was that we had to retrospectively think about how to get into a building that wasn't designed for those services. And the easiest solution was to bring everything through the car park and up into the building.
So the resilient electrical power to a hospital, and particularly to intubated patients, is key. They're on equipment that's in effect breathing for them. So having that resilient power is fundamental. We were working with other consultants. Jerry, who was the lead electrical guy on that, came up with a brilliant way of, in effect, using the infrastructure that was in the ExCeL centre and splicing in UPS and generators into that system, so still using their sort of base build cableways, but introducing resilient electrical generation into that, and then also using the temporary power that and electrical systems that they use to, again, wire up the exhibition stands, but using that in a slightly different way to power the bed bay electricity to give it, again, more resilience. So it was a really, really ingenious way of using what we had.
With regards to fire safety, it was probably one of the more difficult elements we had to deal with. We had an existing fire strategy for an exhibition hall. So evacuation procedures for an exhibition hall and typical fire escape routes for an exhibition hall. Unfortunately, with healthcare, they're a lot more fragmented. You zone that down into bed bases, ward bases, non-clinical spaces. We couldn't adapt that into an exhibition hall, or actually get that to work in an exhibition hall. So we looked at a completely hybrid solution. We worked with a fire engineer who'd worked for the NHS for 30 years, and he helped us with the local fire brigade to develop an evacuation strategy and a fire principle that would keep the patients and staff as safe as possible, but working within the constraints of an exhibition hall.
The programme was really challenging because we knew that we were designing, and as we were designing, we knew they were building. So we had to make sure that our designs were flexible. When we were putting stuff down, we were probably making an extra allowance for it to give us that flexibility. But also I think everything we designed had to be repeatable as well. And it gave us, because we were doing 500 beds, we then had the initially. We then had to sort of have the ability to go back and revisit it and look at what we might change. Data, for example, changed. Initially, there wasn't going to be any data to the beds. It was all going to be paper records. And then on, I think, the Wednesday, I got a phone call from someone saying they needed to know where they were going to put the 4,000 computers that were arriving. And they were having to build these computers. So suddenly, we do need data everywhere. So it was, how do we get the data in? So it was making sure that what we were designing was flexible enough to sort of cope with the change that might happen.
We were probably lucky at the time that the pandemic was starting, people were starting to work from home, so we were getting used to the environment of working remotely. We'd already, as a company, moved ourselves to working slightly remotely, so working a team off-site and working a team on-site was probably a slightly easier flow because we'd gotten used to doing that anyway with remote working. So we had a localised team of fluctuating from about 6 to 12 people on site who would touch base with our off-site team 3-4 times a day, hand over at the end of the day with a data drop, and then we could continue working through the night if we needed to, in some cases we had to then bring data back in the following morning. But everything was done via remote access into our central network, and then video conferencing pretty much running daily throughout the day.
We learnt so much in the first 5 days really about how to do things quickly. I was sort of coming home on a taxi one day and I was thinking, we've learnt so much, we need to get this out there. I was sort of fielding phone calls from BDP colleagues who were starting to say they were going to look at other facilities. I had a conversation with Dan Walder, Paul Bailey, about coming to site, looking at what we were doing and trying to get an instruction manual together, something very visual. And the guys worked on it all weekend really, looking at what they could do, how we could do it. We wanted something that was really visual but very simple. So on the instruction manual we had scope out, which was really looking at what the site needed to deliver. There needed to be enough space around the building, it needed to be secure, there needed to be potentially staff accommodation. Layout was really looking at the different clinical spaces that were required, so whether these were the ward areas, staff change areas, diagnostic areas. So it was really looking at what the individual elements of each surge hospital were and how they would fit within the building. We then had fit out, which was really looking at how the bed bays might be constructed and what was required for those, and looking at the sort of ventilation requirements in terms of the donned-off areas. And then kit out was really looking at the medical equipment and really trying to identify what each bed bay would require in terms of bed, ventilator, computer for electronic patient records, various waste streams and the like. So it was really trying to separate it out into all the things we'd learned and how we could fit that onto one instruction booklet. So the idea was that you'd have a post that you could put on the wall and people could look at it and understand what was going on. And we pulled something together, issued it out, and it was really grasped on by lots of people. I think they could see the benefit from it. It was a nice way of describing what we'd done, and hopefully it was useful.
How would I describe the experience? With great difficulty. It's probably one of the most rewarding things I've ever undertaken. It's a strange thing to say that, delivering a pandemic hospital is a rewarding thing, but it was something that for myself, I'd say national pride, but it was something you had to do, something you had to be involved in. It was probably one of the most daunting tasks I've ever taken on, will ever take on in my entire career, but something that was ultimately rewarding and something that you felt like you had to do at that point in time.
I mean, I think everyone involved, it will live with them for the rest of their life. It was exhilarating, exhausting, something you really felt at the time you were making a difference. And I don't think I'll ever work on a project that was so sort of intense. I mean, I literally worked on it for 7 days and that was it, but it does feel like it was something that was, will live with me for the rest of my life. I think everyone who worked on it was very proud about what they were doing. And yeah, it was interesting. It was something you felt, everyone else was locked down, feeling frustrated, and it was just really nice to be able to go and do something that you hoped might make a positive difference.